I'm Debi Aquino, and today I want to talk about removing backgrounds. Couple things I wanted to touch on first, though. I've noticed when I'm watching everybody's videos online that we often can't see the toolbar. So I've moved my toolbar from over on the left to over here on the right. So I hope you can see the toolbar. And I've also noticed, let me see if I can dock this here. Here we go. I've also noticed that you can't see the Photoshop menu on top. You can see the options menu, but you can't see the Photoshop menu. So I may call that out specifically when we're working through these. But today, like I said, I want to talk about backgrounds. So we've all taken photos like this. I went to Hollywood on a gray day, and that's what I got. And it looks ever so much better like that. And that's one of the top 10 things people want to learn how to do, is to be able to replace a background like that. So I want to talk a little bit about how you'd go about doing that. So there's really two ways to get rid of a background. One is to erase it, and the other is to mask it. So I'm going to start with the eraser. There are Photoshop people who, when you say erase, they go, oh, blasphemy, never erase. But sometimes erasing is a valid choice. So it depends on what you're doing. I'm going to go ahead and choose my eraser. It's the letter E. If you want to press the letter E, it'll go right to the eraser. And like a lot of the tools in the toolbar here, the eraser is a brush. So over up here in your options bar, we have what kind of a brush you can use. You have access to all the brushes in your Photoshop library. I'm going to start with a hard round brush, just because. And when I start to erase, there's something wrong here. Here we go. So over here on my background layer, if I start to erase, this is what happens. It's just turning white. It's not becoming transparent, to say nothing of how tedious it is to erase. But what's happening here is this is a flat file. This background layer is flat. It is locked. So there is no transparency here. And when you use the eraser, it erases to whatever your background color is. So your colors, your background, your foreground colors are down here at the bottom of your toolbar. The foreground color, obviously in the foreground, the background color in the background. And when I erase, I'm getting white because that's my background color. If I were to switch those, now I'm going to erase with gold because it's my background color. When what I really want is true transparency. So I'm going to undo that and that. And then if I unlock this layer, now when I use my eraser, I can erase and I get true transparency. And the reason we know it's transparent is we have this little checkerboard in the back that shows you it's transparent. But again, this is really a tedious way to go about and get rid of a background. For a long time, it's all we had, so we used what we had, but we don't have to do that anymore. So I'm going to undo that. So the other way to do this would be to mask it. I'm going to do it this way instead. So now Photoshop has this brand new select subject button. It has a brand new algorithm. It works great-ish. It works great on certain things. But for instance, this image here, if I were to say select subject, I don't know if you can see that, but it missed this whole portion of the building and the tree and part of the bottom here. So that's not really, that didn't really work out very well. I'm going to undo that. I can also try remove background. And the thing about remove background, I'm going to go ahead and choose remove background, and then we'll talk about it. So remove background is kind of the opposite of select subject in that it always selects or creates a mask. But again, if you don't have a good selection, it doesn't matter what the mask looks like if the selection isn't good to begin with. So what I want to do is I want to start off talking about selections. Creating a selection is really a skill. It's something that takes practice and takes what I call butt in the chair. You have to have your butt in the chair working with the selection tools till you figure out how they work so you can refine your selections. While Photoshop is giving us tools now that do ever so much better at making selections, it's still up to us to get that selection right. So let me talk a little bit about the tools, the selection tools. So the selection tools start on your toolbar. They are the first 4 tools in your tool set. The first one, of course, is the Move tool. The Move tool will allow you to move layers. It will, within the Layers panel, it will allow you to move an object on a layer. And it's kind of the go back to tool when you need to settle on a tool. It's a good tool to go back to. The next 3 tools are all selection tools. The first one is the Marquee Tool, and if you hold your cursor down on the little corner icon, if there are tools underneath, they will appear here. And honestly, I've used the single column Marquee Tool and the single row Marquee Tool maybe twice in my life. As a web designer, I've used them a few times, but they're really, I keep expecting them to go away. But the other 2 are the rectangle and the elliptical marquee. So I'm going to start with the rectangle. Now, here's another thing, is this image I call a perfect world image. It will be easy to make selections on an image like this because we have a high contrast background. None of our objects touch or cross. So these are going to be easy to select. I'm going to take my rectangular marquee tool. Notice that when you choose the rectangular marquee, you do have a select and mask button. And you can choose whether or not to feather your selection. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just trying to show you how the tools work. So I'm going to drag a selection around my bottle, and we have a marquee selection. Now, if I were to duplicate that, Control J, I have the bottle selected, but I also have the background. So that really didn't do what I wanted. But I'm going to go back here and show you again. So if I want this bottle, and all the selection tools work this way, so I'm starting with the Marquee tool because it's easier to see. If I want to add to this selection, I want this bottle over here. If I hold down my Shift key, notice I get the plus on my Marquee tool, and I can drag around this bottle, and when I let go, it selects each of these. If I hold down my Option key, I get the Marquee minus, and then any flashing pixel that I touch or cross with this minus marquee will deselect. So that gives us a way to add pixels or take pixels away. I'm going to add this one. And now if I choose my Option or my Alt, like I said, you have to touch or cross the marching ants. So if I cross these, I will take that chunk out of the inside of that selection. So that plus and minus, add to and take away from your selection, shows up in all the selection tools. Now to deselect, when you have marching ants this way, you can either click away from it like that, just click somewhere else and click away, or up on the menu, up on top where it says select, where you can't see it, if you hold the select menu down, we have a deselect. And the shortcut for that is Command or Control D, and it will deselect your selection. Okay, so that's that part. Now I'm going to go to the Lasso tool. Now, the Lasso Tool has 3 tools. It has the Lasso Tool, the polygonal Lasso Tool, and the magnetic Lasso Tool. These 2 are a pain in the neck, this one especially. This one I've used occasionally, but my favorite by far is the Lasso Tool. It is not a tool that is going to be precise, ever. It will allow you to make a loose selection around something. And it works a lot like the Marquee Tool or the elliptical marquee, in that if I were to duplicate this selection, again, I get the background with it, which is, again, not what we want. So these tools are kind of what I call cleanup tools. They allow me to clean up other selections that I make with the next 3 set of tools. And these are the newest tools on the block. And these are the wand tools. We have the object selection tool, the quick selection tool, the magic wand tool. Actually, the magic wand has been around forever and ever. It was the first big star for Photoshop. Quick selection has been around a few years. I have to say, it appears to me to be working a whole lot better. And the object selection tool is also, it's brand new. So this is the one we're going to start with, is object selection. Now, anytime you select the wand tools, this options bar up here, you will always get a select subject tool button, just like you get over on your properties panel, you get a select subject, and they work the same way. If you choose select subject, it will make a selection of all the obvious objects on your layer. I'm going to deselect that. And you also have these tools if you want to customize it. When I did select subject, it selected all the bottles on the layer. And notice, even though this is a background layer, it still went ahead and selected, unlike the others. So I can take my rectangle tool and I can go around a bottle. And now it snaps to the bottle. It does not pick up my background, which is so awesome. And if I want to add another bottle here, if I hold my shift key down, see, I get the plus again, and I can marquee around another bottle, and it will do the same thing. It will snap to the object because, as I said, this is a perfect world image. We also have a lasso tool up here, works the same way. I'm not holding anything down this time, so it should deselect these 2, because I'm going to go around this with my lasso. And now this is selected and these selections have gone away. So this is a big, big improvement over what we've had before. And it's also a big improvement over how this tool has worked in the past. Select subject is working ever so much better. So I want to show you a little bit about select subject. I'll come back to how the quick selection tool and the magic wand tool work in just a minute, but mainly I want to talk about select subject. So I'm going to open up, again, a perfect world image. And we want to go around her hair. Now, if we were to use a magic wand tool, we might be able to, we could pick up this part of the hair, but look at all the little pieces in here. There's all kinds of white in there. So let's give select subject its shot. So I'm going to just click the button and it instantly creates a selection. You can zoom in and kind of see. We've got marching ants here and here. It missed a few places here. So this is where select and mask comes into play. I'm going to choose select and mask. And now, because I have chosen this view, I can kind of see where I'm missing, where Photoshop missed the select subject. But that is a huge improvement from what it's done in the past. Let me talk about this for a minute. On this, in this dialog box, you have several ways you can look at it. For most of you, the default is the onion skin mode. Now, the onion skin at 100%, it's going to, this area is going to be all transparent. At 0%, we're going to have our white background. Because this is a white background, I still think it's hard to see what's transparent and what's not. So you have all these other options. You have the marching ants, which we've always had, but you also have an overlay. And with the overlay, I can see the white spots in her hair. I can see it on black. Ooh, that really shows off the white spots. White doesn't help us. This shows us the mask, and sometimes that's helpful and sometimes not. And then what it would look like on a layer. I want to go back, actually I want to go back to the black one because it makes it easy to see. Now, once I choose that, then it's up to my tools to refine this selection. This tool on top is a quick selection tool. The second one is a refine edge tool, much like the refine edge tool we've had in the past. This is a brush tool. New to this selection box is the object selection tool. And underneath that is the lasso tool and the polygonal lasso tool. And all these selection tools are in here so that if you wanted to, you could create your entire selection in here and then refine it in here as well. Depends on your workflow and how you want to work. I kind of like to refine my selection as much as I can before I get here. So it's up to you. The refine edge brush though is pretty awesome. These things, show edge, show original, high quality preview, I never use them. I'm going to take my refine edge and I'm just going to paint over these areas that are white. Now, you can hold your brush down and just keep painting and go over all the areas you want. And Photoshop does a pretty good job at it, but understand that this algorithm is out there just calculating away, trying to figure out exactly what you want. So I've found that it tends to work better if you do it in short spells. I'll do this a little bit, then I'll do this little bit, and well, I'm pretty much done. I could probably pick on this for a while. I think that's an earring down here. I can try to cover it. Okay. But now you can see that it really looks good. Edge detection, I never use. Global refinements, I occasionally use the shift edge if I'm trying to maybe tuck a little aberration of color back underneath the rest of the unit. But I rarely use that. So I kind of stick with my tools and my view modes. And then down here at the bottom, we have, how do you want to output this? Output settings. So the first one you come to is decontaminate colors. I want to show you this. When I undo decontaminate colors, look at all that stuff that comes back. But when I click it again, that's pretty impressive. It takes all that away. So I tend to always use decontaminate colors. Output 2. Now you have some options here. You can output it to a new layer with a layer mask, to a new document with layer mask. This is going to depend on your workflow, on what you want to do. I'm going to say new layer with layer mask. And notice if you like your setup, you can choose to remember your settings so that you can go through this faster. I'm going to say okay. And now you can see it's hard to see because we don't have a background. So let's do a background. I'm going to go over here to my background layer. And the reason I'm doing that is when you add, I want to add a solid color adjustment layer underneath this layer. So adjustment layers appear above whatever layer you're on. So I'm choosing the background layer, and I'm going to go to the adjustment layer icon at the bottom of my layers panel and choose solid color. Now, because Photoshop is sticky, it remembers the last color that I had as my foreground color, it's going to stay the same. If you want to change your color, you need to go to the slider here in the color bar and move up and down through the colors until you find a color you like. And then you have to click inside this box to select the color. Once you've found one, you say okay, and now it puts that layer behind it. But look how great her hair looks. It really looks good, and it doesn't look scraggly either. Now, like I said, this is what I call a perfect world image. So let's try this on something that is not a perfect world image. This is one of my clients, and she wanted to use this image on her brochure. And I hate it when people give me stuff like this. This is just terrible to try to get rid of. But let's see how our new select subject does. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on the button. And I actually think it did a really decent selection. It didn't get a lot of, a lot of this stuff. So let's go ahead and say select and mask. Now it's on the black. So I'm going to move this over to the overlay. And you can see the little white spaces in her hair. So using Refine Edge, I'm just going to paint over it. And it really does an amazing job. Now, sometimes when you do this, you end up with stray hairs that end up sticking out the wrong way, and you create editing for yourself. But sometimes it works most of the time it works really great. I'm really impressed with this. Maybe a little over here, but that's really pretty good. Now, I want you to notice that I accidentally mask over her earring. I'm going to leave that on purpose just so I can show you something. But I think it did a pretty good job. If I show it on black, white, the white really looks good. But do notice there are aberrations in here. Here's some stuff up here. I could try going over that again. So while it gets rid of this, sometimes it creates stuff. There's a big kind of globby right there. So that's something you would have to go back and either fix in the mask or erase again. I'm going to go ahead and say new layer with layer mask. And now when I go to my layer mask, I want to display that layer mask. See that earring right there? This is why it's good to be able to get to your layer mask. So I'm going to go get my brush. I have the mask selected on that layer. And in a mask, white acts as the eraser. So I'm just going to erase that part right there. So now her earring is not contained in that. This will also let me see, remember there's some fuzzy stuff here. I would go in and, whoops, I want to change this to black. I'm going to press my X key to change this to black, and I'm just going to get rid of some of that. And this is where I need a soft brush instead of a hard brush. Much better. And just some of these aberrations to clean up around the edge of the mask. And I'll show you why in just a minute. If you duplicate this for any reason, those aberrations will get big and ugly really fast. Okay, that's not too bad. Might be a little bit right here. And as you do more of this, you'll be able to see this better and better. All right. So I want to add a solid color background again. I'm going to click on my background layer, or my bottom layer, background layer, and to add a solid color. I'm just going to say okay. Now here's something kind of fun. So I'm back on my top layer where I have the mask of her hair. And I want you to look at her hair around here. You know, it's kind of, it kind of sticks out that way. It's cute. but I'd like for it to be thicker. And a really easy way to make this thicker is to duplicate that layer. Command or Control J, and watch these areas of her hair. It gets thicker and thicker. Now that's where those aberrations I talked about in the mask can show up badly. So in the real world, I would get rid of these two, go back and fix the original, and then duplicate them again so that I just didn't have to adjust that 9 times. But yeah, that's the select subject works really well. It does some really cool things. But let's talk about some of the real world stuff. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. So here I have this couple. I would like to put them in a wine glass. But I just want to talk about the selection here. I'm going to go ahead and select the object selection tool. And I'm going to say select subject. And it does a really pretty good job. Where I would go into select and mask is when I'm doing their hair. I'm not too worried about the dress, the pants, that kind of stuff, but especially around hair is where select and mask is really valuable. But I do want to zoom in on this part because I want to show you a couple things. So select and mask missed, or select subject missed the back part of his head here. I'm going to go and get my quick selection tool. Ooh, and the quick selection tool is also a brush. My brush is a little bit big, so I'm going to use my bracket key, my left bracket key, to make it smaller. And that's how you control how much the quick selection brush, how many pixels it will acquire as you move it across your selection, is by the size of the brush. So I'm going to make mine quite a bit smaller. And then as I go up to this selection right here, I'm just going to kind of kiss it with that plus. I'm going to hold my mouse button down and kind of go over and kiss that and watch it move little by little. Now it moved too much there. Sometimes it will move too much and then bounce back. It bounced back right here. It didn't right there. I've got a little more here. I'm just going to go over and kiss that. And then of course, any pixels I really don't want, I can just go over. So that's how your quick selection brush works. Now, here I have a pixel that has bled into the space I don't want. If you hold down your Alt or your Option key, this becomes a minus. And again, I'm just going to go up and kiss that pixel to kind of move it into place. Back over here on this side, I've got a couple here. So I'm pretty close. Now I'm pretty close around all his hair across here. But that was a big space across the back just because it was so light. And I could go ahead and try to pick up some of this. I am more concerned about, there's a tooth missing here and part of her lip is missing here. I'm going to go and get my Lasso Tool, and I'm going to use it. Again, hold down your Shift key to add to the selection. I'm just going to lasso that part of the tooth that was missed, and this part of the lip that was missed. The other thing I want to point out to you is, see, their noses touch right here. I think I'm going to let select and mask work on that one too. So you kind of have to work through your image and figure out which part of the tool works the best. I kind of look at these tools like, I don't know how many people remember this, Felix the cat, he had that magic bag of tricks. Well, these are your tools in your magic bag of tricks that allow you to make selections to allow you to do cool things. So now that I have my selection in place, I want to go back to select and mask, but I don't have a button anywhere for select and mask. Well, you can either go back to your wand tools, or you can go up here to the select menu And this is where select and mask lives. So we can choose select and mask from there to open up that dialog box. And it opened up with whatever I did last time. I'm going to go to overlay. Whoop, yeah, overlay. And here, I see down here, there's some of her hair that, or background that her hair missed. And that little spot there. So I'm going to go ahead and use my Refine Edge brush. Again, it's huge. I want to reduce it. And zooming in helps a lot when you're doing this kind of work. I'm going to reduce it again. And I'm just going to paint through there with the Refine Edge brush and get rid of that. Now I want to go back to this area where her hair is. Ooh, I see a little white in there. I'm going to make the brush a little bigger and just paint through where I see that hair peeking through. And I'm going to go over these a little bit, see if it'll fix that up. Sometimes that smudge that I'm getting, sometimes this will fix it up. And now I want to go check his hair. Just want to kind of go over this and see if I can bring it back, any of this little look there. Ooh. And on the white view mode, that's a good place to check and see if you've got smudge. Yeah, see, I have smudge here. So I know I'm going to have to fix that part. All right. I'm going to go ahead and choose to decontaminate colors, new layer with layer mask, and say okay. Add one more color background. And I think that did a pretty good job with his hair. It's, you know, it's got a nice little feathered effect there, not feathered, but stubbly effect. And this is not bad either, but I will need to go into the mask and fix this part. So these are the kind of real world things that you're going to run into. All right, any questions so far?
Hey, Debbie.
Yes.
Can you change the edge from sharp to soft or number of pixels or whatever while we're doing the selection?
Yes, you can. Can I come back to that question?
Certainly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, but yes, you can. You can soften that edge.
Hey, Debbie.
All right.
Yes. I sent you a question on chat, but this image maybe covers it. Are you going to go over using color to select, like you might do with the blue sky in this image?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, I think there's a function where you can select a color.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, yes. I am going to go over that.
Okay, super.
Okay. All right. So this is a great little photo, except that the sky is really boring. And, you know, this is typical of a lot of things I like to do too, is, you know, you get an image that's almost there, but not quite there. So I want to select my sky and replace the sky, but I want to show you a couple things. So if I go to Object Selection Tool and I say Select Subject, it selected my subject, but that wasn't really what I wanted. I wanted the ground too. So I'm going to deselect that. And this is where I would use a quick selection tool. Now, the quick selection tool is the brush. I'm going to make my brush bigger. Like I said, you control how many pixels this brush selects by its size. So I'm going to go over the horse first. And I'm going to go ahead and just keep going down into the bottom part here. Now, because it's so green, it will select pretty easily. And that's pretty close. up here, I noticed that it did not select my horse's nose and lip very well. So I'm going to make my brush smaller. And like I said, I'm just going to go up and kind of kiss that edge. And it will pop, it'll snap, sometimes better than others, to the edge. And I like to just do a little quick, go around, make sure that nothing big or obvious has. Now, this area I do not want because it's part of the sky. And using my quick selection brush, I can hold down my Option key and I can paint through that area. And this horse's tail, I can decide later what I'm going to do with that. So now that I have this selected, I want to add a layer mask to it. So I'm going to go down to the layer mask icon, and it has protected my horse and my background, or my foreground, and it has gotten rid of the sky. So now I'm going to bring in that one. Bring another image in. And drag it underneath my image. Now, to kind of combine these or adjust the lighting for both of these images, what I want to do is go down to the adjustment layer icon, and I'm going to choose photo filter. And then I'm going to come over here to the filter, and I'm going to change it to a cooling filter LBB. And then you can either adjust the density, or you can adjust the opacity on the adjustment layer to get it more realistic. Actually, I thought it looked pretty good like that. So that can take a blah image. Whoop, I don't have a before and after. That can take kind of a blah image and just dress it up a little bit, and it's pretty easy to do. But now we're going to get to Pete's question. What do you have when you're trying to do something a little different? So I want this. Okay. All right, I'm going to do, there's two things I want to do here. Whoop. I want to change the color of these flowers, and I want to replace the background, the sky. So I want to show you a couple of different ways, things we can do here. Now I'm going to go ahead and do Command or Control J to duplicate the layer. Come on. Don't fight with me now. There we go. All right, so I mentioned earlier that we have a Photoshop menu that we can't see. Now you can see it. Up at the top up here, we have a select menu. Actually, this was originally a selections menu, but way back when Adobe had this thing about you could only have 7-character menu names. So it became select instead of selections. So I need to be on my background layer. So if you go up to your selections menu, you have some other commands for selections. Not only do you have select and mask, you also have a color range, a focus area. So both of these are really cool. We're going to start with color range. So with color range, the slider for this is 0 to 200. You can select specific colors. If you want to just do the yellows, it will show you the yellows in the proxy. You can also do highlights, midtones, shadows, or just skin tones. You can even select out of gamut colors. If you're doing printing and you've selected web colors, they will select your out of gamut colors for you. So you have a lot of choices here. This box you could play with for a very long time, this dialog box. I'm going to stay with sampled colors for right now. So we have these little eyedroppers. And this box is showing you this selection below. You can see it in grayscale, on a black mat, white mat. When you mouse over into your image, your eyedropper, I'm going to pick a yellow flower, maybe one of these. And notice how this proxy box will change as I select different flowers. Whoop, don't want that one, that one. And depending on how much you want to select, this slider is for that. And you judge it by looking at the proxy. And if you go all the way up, now going all the way up, you'll notice too that up here in the image, we start to pick up color, because it's when you select these colors, every time you select, you could make a different selection, especially on a yellow color like this. There's all kinds of different yellows in these. So if I change, that's why this changes when I choose a different color. It's going to make me lie to me now. There we go. So choose a color. And then once you say okay, it creates that selection for you, which is kind of cool. Now what I want to do with this yellow selection, and usually when I'm using this, okay, I've selected all the yellow, I just kind of do a spot check up in the area up here to see if there's any flashing pixels that I want to get rid of. But for right now, there's not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new blank layer, and I want to fill that selection with color. So I'm going to go up to Edit, and I'm going to say Fill. And I'm going to say Color. And now I'm going to choose a different color. I'm going to choose something up in the purplish range. And then I'm going to go ahead and say okay. Now that just looks like we just slapped ink on it, a layer, and didn't really do anything but paint over the flowers. But here's the trick to this. So on that layer where we just slapped paint on, we're going to go up to the blending mode up here and drag it down to color. And then I'm going to adjust my opacity just a little bit, drag it down a little bit. Not so much that all of my yellow comes back, but enough to kind of get that field to looking like it's purple instead of yellow. Okay, so now I want to select the sky. And this kind of a sky is a really tough selection. First of all, it's all over the place. It's down here in, not only is it in the tree, it's down here in the bushes, it's way down here in this tree. And this tree is not a real pretty tree, but we still want to replace our background. So let's do something a little different. First of all, I'm going to go back to my background copy. And there's just no good way to select this with the object selection tool or even the quick selection tool. It would be a disaster. So the magic wand is the tool for this job. And the reason is because of the options that this tool has. So when you go to this tool, it has a tolerance. The tolerance goes from 1 to 255, and we have the ability to say contiguous or non-contiguous. By the way, almost all the, in fact, all the selection tools, you can sample all layers, and sometimes that's helpful and sometimes not. For this, I want to remove the check mark from contiguous. Now, I'm pretty sure if I select 20, I'm not going to get a very good selection. So I'm going to go ahead and change my tolerance to 40. And this is just a guess. You can keep deselecting and reselecting and moving your tolerance up till you get what you want, or you can do a couple other things I'll show you. So I've changed my tolerance to 40. I'm going to click over here and I get a pretty good selection. I got some of this. I didn't get all of this. One of the things I could do is hold my shift key down and notice I get the magic wand plus, and I could click on the areas to add. But here's something else I can do too. Up on my select menu, if you go up to select, you can say similar, and it will select the similar colored pixels. Now, unfortunately, it also selected a bunch of pixels down here. And I'm not entirely sure it got all my pixels here. I'm going to undo that for a second. There's also another up here under the select menu. We also have grow. And what that does is it just grows your selection a little bit, what it thinks it might, what might be enough. This is an entire guess on Photoshop's behalf. But that was a little better. I'm going to say grow again. And it gets better slowly. I'm missing some stuff over here. So this time I'm going to say similar. And you can see I got way more because I allowed it to grow differently. There's no perfect way to get this kind of a selection. You just kind of have to learn how the tools work and understand how to use them and when to use them. So I want to get rid of these pixels down here that are flashing, that are not part of it. So I'm going to use my lasso tool, and I'm going to hold down my Option or my Alt key, and it becomes lasso minus. And I'm just going to make a little lasso around all those pixels I don't want to be turned into background pixels. And I could probably pick on this for days, but you get, and depending on the image, you may want to spend the time. But that's a pretty good selection of the background. So I want to open up this image. I want to select all, or Control A, Command or Control A, edit, copy. I want to go back to this image and notice I'm on the background layer, but what I'm going to do will cause Photoshop to create a layer. So I'm not worried about exactly that problem. So I'm going to go up to edit. I'm going to say paste special and paste into. And there is my background. Now I want to point out about this background. This background and this mask are not linked together. You could link them together, but they're not. And the reason is we want our mask to stay in place no matter what. On the other hand, our sky right here, we might want to, with your move tool, if you go and move your sky, you might want maybe some of those mountains in the background after all, or maybe not. And if you have your mask linked to your image, the mask would move too, and then it would look weird. This tree looks terrible. That's just what happens when you use the quick selection tool, or I'm sorry, the magic wand tool, and the way it has to select it. It's going to. This tree was bad to begin with, so it's going to depend on the image on whether or not you want to use that. Now, I don't find it too bad. I might come in and maybe clone some of this later if it was really annoying. But those are two ways to use, or a few ways to use these selection tools and also the select menu. Okay, Any questions? All right, so let me show you. I call them tricks, but they're not really. Let me show you this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use select subject to get my selection. Now, for those of you who have used selection tools for a while, and even if you haven't, they can be very frustrating. You can work on a selection for a long period of time, and then the cat comes in and jumps in your lap and bobbles your mouse, and you lose the whole thing. And I've had that happen a few times in my career. So here I have a selection, and I might want to someday come back to that selection for whatever reason. You can save selections in your Photoshop documents. So once you have a selection in place, it has to be active, has to be flashing. You go up to your select menu, and we have down here, save selection. And it will ask you to give it a name. And you just say, okay. And now I'm going to deselect. Now, it's 6 months later, and I want to work on this image. And in order to get to my selection, I go up to select. I say load selection. And there it is, living in my channels panel. And I can say, okay, and boom, my selection is back. So let me show you how that looks. Here is our channels panel. We have our color channels, red, RGB, red, green, and blue. And then down here on the bottom, we have they used to call them alpha channels. Now they just call them channels. And you can have as many channels in your image as you want. I've done advertising, design, and production work where I would have 10 items on a page and have to have a selection for each different one. So it is only limited by how much file size or file space you have. You do have to save your image as a PSD or a TIFF in order to save your channels, but you can save them forever. Also, when I've done a really complicated selection that has taken a long time, I tend to save in between, even though it's not a complete selection, just so that I don't have to go back and recreate that work later on. So one thing I want to go back to with this is, Harrison, you were asking about changing the edge. So I have a selection in place, and I'm going to do Control J. And that was a hard selection. It does not have a soft edge. So for it to have a soft edge, first I need a selection. So I'm going to hold down my Command or Control key and click on this icon. Whatever you have on that layer will become selected. Or I could have gone up to select and done load selection, but I have a selection in place. So now if I want to change that edge, I go up to select, modify, and we feather. The more resolution your image has, the higher the feather radius will need to be. So I'm going to leave this at about 9 pixels, and I'm going to say okay. And ever so slightly, you will see that this has a softer edge. Let me do that again with a higher feather. I'm going to say 50. And now you can see that this edge here, from here to here, 50 pixels wide, will have a soft feather around it. Now, that's not my favorite way to do feathers. Let me show you my favorite way. I'm going to go back to my selection. Oops, there we go. If you know up front you need a feathered selection, you can feather it from the get-go. Once you have your selection in place, let's go back here. You can say border, I'm going to say 20 pixels. There we go. And what this does is this gives you the area to feather. I'm going to go back here to modify, feather. Ooh. I'm going to bring that down to about 25. Okay, nothing wants to work today. All right, I'm going to move on. That's just not working. All right, back to this selection now. Here is something that will work I want to show you. When you go up here to select and you say modify, sometimes we need for this selection to be just a few pixels bigger or smaller. So I'm going to say select, modify, expand. I'm going to say 20 pixels and say okay. And my selection has expanded by 20 pixels. Conversely, if I need it to be smaller, I can say select, modify, contract. I'm going to say 30 pixels and say okay. And now it's contracted 30 pixels. Oh, and then there's also select, modify, smooth. And smooth generally doesn't do much of anything. I don't use it very much, but it's there as well. The ones I use the most are, oh, I have to have a selection. The ones I use the most are expand, contract, and feather. And I'm not sure why feather doesn't want to work today, but it doesn't. All right, so this next one is the last one, and it's more realistic about what you're going to do in the real world with removing backgrounds. So here's an image I took over at Descanso Gardens, middle of the day. You know, you just do the best you can with the light you have. So here's what I want to do is I want to change this to a black and white, and I want to change it. I want to get rid of a lot of this stuff that's down here, and I want to change the background to black. So here's what I want to do. First, I want to choose the portion of the flower that I want to work with. So I'm going to take my lasso tool, and I'm going to lasso around the edge of this flower, like so. Now, in this particular case, because I don't want to Photoshop to spend a great deal of time looking for certain color pixels, I'm going to help Photoshop by cutting this part out to begin with. I know I don't want this leaf here, so I'm going to be very careful when I go through. Oh. I like that green leaf, but I don't want any of these green ones. And I just want to double check my selection a little bit. Like I really don't want to have to edit out this white part. So if I fix my selection now, it'll be better for me later. All right, that's good enough. And because I just want to work on this part, this time I'm just going to do Command or Control J to get just that portion of the flower on its own layer. Yay. So now I'm going to go get my magic wand tool because I want to get rid of that blue. I'm going to change my tolerance to 60. Oops, 60. I want to make sure there's no check mark next to contiguous. And then I'm going to click in the blue pixels here. And that's going to make a selection of all those blue pixels. And then I'm just going to press delete because I don't want them anymore. I just want them gone. Ooh, I'm liking that. All right, so I know this is going to go on a background, on a black background, and black will help me see here. I'm going to go back to my background layer. I'm going to go down to the bottom. I'm going to choose a solid color adjustment layer. I'm going to change it to black. Ooh, there we go. And click OK. Already looking better. Now, in this image, honestly, the stuff I want to get rid of, I don't really want to mask. I just want to get rid of it. So I'm going to go ahead and use an eraser tool. So I'm going to go get my eraser. I want it to be a hard edge, a hard round brush, and I'm going to make it a little smaller just to get to these things I want to get rid of. And of course, if this is an important image, you're going to spend hours on it. I'm doing this really quickly, quick and dirty, as I like to say. But I have spent hours and hours on other images. Now, here we get into these white things you're going to spend time with. But these green things here, I just want to get rid of them. I don't want them to be part of my image, because I'm going to cover up something over here. Okay. Now I would like to fill in this area with some of these. So I'm going to go get my lasso tool. I'm just going to lasso around some of these, whatever they are. I don't know what this flower is. Some of you out there might know, but I don't know what it is. And I want to duplicate that, Control J. Perfect. Now I'm going to go get my move tool, and I'm going to move this over here. And I'm going to get my eraser tool and just erase some of this that's not blending well. Okay. Now, one of the things I try to avoid when I'm doing this is this looks like a copy. They look almost the same. So I'm going to take my transform tool and distort this a little bit. So I'm going to do Edit, Free Transform, or Command T. Now, transform normally will just make this bigger or smaller when you drag it. But if you hold down your Command key or your Option key or your Control key, you can distort this a little bit so that it doesn't look quite the same. And actually, I'd probably do a little puppet warp here too, just to kind of change those around. And then last but not least, I want to add my black and white. And I'm going to change this to a high contrast red filter. Woo! Maybe dial that down a little bit. Maybe, ooh, too much. Dial my reds down a little bit. There we go. Okay. All right, so there we are. We've replaced a background. Let me show you before and after. So there's before, and here is after. All right, any questions?